Did you ever challenged your knowledge about Africa? I know that may sound like a silly question, but let me tell you a funny story. I was certainly an international student when I started my master's degree in a business school in Washington, D.C. That was a couple of years ago. And I remember that beautiful day, end of August. I was a little bit nervous about my first day, but at the same time, I was so excited about meeting people from all over the world. So we had a terrific induction day, followed by a great dinner with the entire cohort. And I remember precisely from that dinner that I was sitting right next to John. John was a really lovely and funny guy. I can't actually remember precisely where John was coming from because he had a quite mixed background. But what I remember is that when I told to John that I was originally from Ivory Coast, he looked at me and asked me, "Did you learn African at school?" And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, how on earth is it possible to believe that the second largest continent has only one single language spoken across its 54 countries? So I look at John and I say to him with a bright smile, "Of course, John, I speak African. I have been learning African at school. And guess what? As I'm originally from Ivory Coast, I had a pet elephant. I was riding him to go to school, except when I knew that I was running late and won't get any parking slot. Then I was riding my gazelle." You are laughing, I know it's funny, but guess what? John believed me. Well, seriously, I'm not saying that you are all John here, and I really, really hope that there are not that much John left out there. However, what I really ask you to do is to challenge the perception you may have about what Africa is. I would like to tell you a bit more about what it is, what it really is, and what it truly is. So right now, Africa is the most entrepreneurship spot on earth. According to the African Development Bank, more than 20% working-age Africans are starting businesses. And if you look at the same number for the working-age female population, it increases to 27%. It means that, concretely, African females are twice as likely to start business than any female elsewhere in the world. And on top of that, the entrepreneurial spectrum across Africa is vast and very diverse. On one side of that spectrum, you have some of the continent's richest individuals. I'm thinking about Aliko Dangote from Nigeria, Nassef Sawiris from Egypt, who generated their wealth through entrepreneurship and large businesses. And somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, you have the medium and small size businesses, including some exciting and promising startups which are scalable. And on the complete other extreme side of the spectrum, you have the vast majority. These millions and millions of micro, tiny entrepreneurs running their businesses in Africa. This includes the street vendors. And from my perspective, these street vendors illustrate this resilient entrepreneurial spirit that so many Africans have ingrained deep inside them to survive. And I would like to tell you a little bit more about that, a little bit more about one of them that I met, Victor. last October during the trade mission organized by the Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce to Abidjan. So as the responsible of an African private capital initiative within one of the big four here in Luxembourg, I am always excited about traveling to Africa to talk about private capital. So on the third day of that trade mission, I was standing in front of my hotel. I was waiting for my taxi driver stuck in a traffic jam. And I saw Victor walking from one point to another one alongside the main road of my hotel. And he was carrying his merchandise on his shoulders, on his hand, and he came to see me with a bright smile. And he asked me if I wanted to buy something from him. And that's how we started our conversation. So I learned from Victor that he was born and raised by a single mom in a tiny village in the center of the country. And he has been able to go to school until he was age 15. Unfortunately, he had to drop out of school because his mom, with a lack of infrastructure, was no longer able to commute 40 kilometers back and forth to go to work. So with no option left, Victor ended up becoming a street vendor. But he told me that although going to school was also a massive struggle for him because he had to commute 20 kilometers back and forth, and at night, he had barely electricity to do his homework. Although this was a massive struggle, the years during which he has been able to go to school were the most precious years of his life. And Victor also explained me how relentlessly on a daily basis he was establishing a place to conduct his business and make something out of his life. Because as you can see, street vending is definitely not integrated into the urban fabrics of African cities. So I asked Victor, so Victor, right now, what is your quest? What are you looking for? And he told me simply, well, making more money, resume school, have my high school degree, and create my business. And I was like, wow, that's a fantastic idea. So what would you like your business to be about, Victor? And he told me, I would like my business to be dedicated to the production and distribution of solar energy across my village and across all villages in Ivory Coast. So, frankly, anytime I think about Victor, 3 words come straight to my mind: resilience, adaptability, and tenacity. And guess what? That Victor story can be found everywhere in Africa. There are millions and millions of Victors across Africa. So now imagine for a moment that the same Victor, that street vendor, could have the possibility to apply all this resilience, adaptability, and tenacity instead of street vending to proper education and entrepreneurship at scale. Imagine the ripple effect across Africa of all the Victors having the possibility to have access to the same thing. Because remember, second largest continent in terms of size and in terms of population. And now that I have your attention, let's together imagine that all those Victors across Africa represent a rocket. And let's think about together what could be the fuel needed to propel that rocket to prosperity. So while for any single entrepreneurial activity to succeed, you need one thing that is critical: money. And from my perspective, there is 2 sources of money. You have free money on one hand, and money that is not free on the other hand, right? And we think about free money, I have in mind aid. What is aid? Basically, richest countries sending some money to poorest countries. But according to the African Development Bank, aid has not proven to be successful when it comes to stimulating the entrepreneurial spirit across Africa. Because in fact, how would you like free money to improve governance, reduce corruption, and ensure a proper allocation of resources? Right? Are you familiar with the expression throwing money at a problem? Honestly, from my perspective, aid is equivalent to throwing money at a problem while the problem still hasn't gone away, right? And Dambisa Moyo, a very well-renowned female economist in Africa, produced a great piece of work around the impact aid had on the African countries. In her book, Dead Aid, she highlighted the fact that over the past 50 years, 1 trillion USD has literally been pumped into the continent. And the funny thing is, if we can say that it's funny, is that while the aid flows were at their top in Africa, between 1970 and 1998, the poverty rate in Africa increased from 11% to 66%. So aid clearly didn't work, right? So let's forget about this aid option as the fuel for our Victor rocket. So now let's look at these non-free money options. In there, you can have stuff such as factoring, crowdfunding, bond issuance, bank loans. But bank loans won't work because they are not accessible to the vast majority of those entrepreneurs in Africa. Why? Because they are simply not affordable with the double-digit interest rate coming from the very high risk perception associated to the continent. So this won't work. But then in this jungle of non-free money options, there is a particular animal, not an elephant, no, not a gazelle. We call it private equity, private capital, at large with all strategies, including private equity. And I'm very familiar with this particular little animal, and I believe that private capital at large is the best solution, is the best fuel option for that Victor's rocket. And I believe so for two main reasons. First of all, the business model of the industry. And secondly, the new normal we are currently living in. So looking first at the business model of the industry, private capital is smart and patient money. It is the opposite of throwing money at a problem. And the great thing about private capital is that it separates this type of investors, quite passive, putting money on the table and leaving the table. The private capital investor, we call it an investment fund, will actually put money on the table, stay at the table, and bring on top knowledge, experience, expertise, know-how. The investment fund will collect money from well-informed investors, invest in the company, and help the company grow and nurture its business. So that's why I believe that private capital is the right solution. The second reason why I believe that it's indeed the right solution is actually the new normal we are currently living in, right? 3 key elements triggered a disruption of our status quo: climate change, the growing dissatisfaction about income inequities, and the COVID pandemic. And from that disruption has emerged a new normal which puts sustainability at the center and as a business imperative. It's very difficult now for any business organization to ignore people, planet considerations in their game plan for profit generation. And that's the triple bottom line. And that's sustainability, the new imperative of every single business organization. So if I summarize here my idea, today, clearly, in today's age, another word for profitability is sustainability. And no organization can escape that. And the private capital industry is taking the narrative further through impact investing, which is a strategy across all private capital strategies. And at the core of impact investing, there is the intentionality to generate profit while being capable of measuring positive impact on the people and on the planet. And people tend to believe that this is not a profitable strategy, but there are many private capital players using impact investing as a strategy that are generating profit, even here in Luxembourg. So as I close, I would like to share with you my deepest conviction. The way forward for the African economies is bright. Africa is on the move, and Africa is moving forward. And what I'm here saying is that the value that the private capital industry is bringing to the African entrepreneurship ecosystem through access to capital, financial discipline, and the integration of people and planet considerations into the mainstream of the investment decision-making process has never been more apparent. So that's why I feel really, really passionate about realizing Africa's possibilities through the private capital industry. And I feel really good about being here at the right place in Luxembourg and at the right time to make the difference. So if you are a private capital player or an avid or talented believer in impact, please look for opportunities across Africa in education, in clean energy, in agriculture, and think about all the profits you can generate out of these triple bottom line opportunities. And if you are just far away from the financial industries and from this private capital market, you can just feel good about feeling good about Africa. Thank you very much.